Okay, good afternoon. Let's get started. If you've looked outside, you're in the calm before the storm. So we'll see what happens if we get thunder and rain over the course of the class, hopefully in like a dramatic point in the class. See how that goes. So as we're heading into the weekend, I just want to give you a couple updates and reminders. If you have not done so already, there is an anonymous feedback form that's on the front page of Canvas and also was sent out in the most recent Canvas announcement. So if you have not been able to complete that, I do want to give you some time to work through that. For the rest of everybody, there is a practice question for us to look at today. So Taylor traveling to Croatia. She wants to learn the language, adapt to the norms of the culture, and be sensitive to some of the ways that this culture might communicate differently, which best describes Taylor's cultural intelligence, an emphasis here on Taylor wanting to learn the language. So we talked about 4 measures of cultural intelligence last class. Take a little bit to think through this, and we'll discuss it together. Anybody who'd like some more time on this question? All right, so let's talk about Taylor's travel to Croatia. How many people believe this is A, cognitive, B, motivational, C, metacognitive, or D, behavioral? Yes, so the best answer here is B, motivational. So a couple folks talking about metacognitive. So let's go over this in a little bit more detail. So the key distinction here is the degree to which somebody desires or wants to engage in intercultural interactions. So the key idea is that because Taylor wants to learn the language, she's motivated to do so. And so therefore, I really want to understand those interactions, right? Metacognitive would be a little bit more about your awareness of your interactions and ways that you can have a better experience. So for instance, this might be Taylor saying something like, I don't understand some of the ways that gestures or haptics are being used in this culture. So I'm aware that this is a limitation of mine that I need to develop, right? So metacognitive is more about the awareness that you have of your own limitations and knowledge. Motivational is more about specific behaviors that you would like to do. Whereas behavioral cultural intelligence is actually doing the things, right? So for instance, choosing to learn the language would be behavioral. And then cognitive just refers to what you know. Again, cogs in the machine, right? Thinking about what knowledge she might have of Croatia and navigating that cultural environment. So we spent some time last class going over these 4 measures of cultural intelligence. I definitely recommend reviewing them if they're an area you want to work on a little bit more, because those will definitely be relevant to the midterm exam. All right, does anybody have any questions about anything we talked about last class? Anything in general about the course as we head into midterms next week? So we discussed some of the challenges, right, of ethnocentrism, viewing your own culture as better than others. Some of the spectrums that we use to define cultures. I know I went through that a little bit quickly, so I want to spend a bit more time on that today. And then some of the ways that, as we talked about, we can define cultural intelligence. So today, I just want to go over just a few things to know as you gear up for the midterm and a couple tips. We'll be talking a little bit more about culture, and I want to spend a bit more time on face negotiation theory. Then we've got a fun little activity that we'll be doing that will help us to analyze and make sense of a culture. So just to give you a clear visual about the timeline. So next Monday's class, attendance is optional. You're welcome to come in if you would like to. Next Monday's class meeting is designed to review the midterm, right? So I encourage you to come into Monday's class having gone through the study guide and to see if you have specific questions. Maybe there are classes that you missed or ideas that were a little bit unclear that you'd like discussed in more detail. I'll bring in some materials as well to help you to review. But if you're feeling good and ready, not need to join us next Monday. So next Wednesday, the 26th, the midterm window will open. And next Wednesday and Friday, we don't have class meetings so that you can use time in order to complete the midterm exam. So midterm again is taken on Canvas, just like the process of doing the Canvas prompts. It's not proctored. There's no weird software you need to download. You can take it from wherever you want. Again, it's open note and open book. And then by the end of the day on Friday, 11:59 p.m. is when the midterm will close. So I recommend, if you're a procrastinator, to start and open the midterm no later than 10 p.m. On Friday the 28th. So that's next week at a glance. And again, I'll use Canvas announcements and updates to keep you in the loop about those upcoming assignments, including when the window for the exam begins. So again, open note, open book. However, right, if you have not done the readings, I encourage you to take some time to work through the readings before you get to the exam, because it's a lot easier to go back through your notes and review material than it is to start from scratch, right? So do take the time to review as you're gearing up and have some notes with you. Again, the thing I really recommend is taking the study guide that's available on Canvas and adding in your own definitions of those terms and filling those in to give yourself a bit of a cheat sheet. You'll have 2 hours to take it. It's 25 multiple choice, just like the ones we do in class. And then 3 short essay options. You can pick which 3 to do out of the 4 prompts available. So generally speaking, that's about an hour on each. I'll say that the average time people take to take the exam is about an hour and a half. So generally speaking, people don't run out of time. Again, I have those practice questions that are available on Canvas to help you out. They're multiple choice questions as well as some short essay questions. And if you would like, right, you can still email me your practice short essay questions, and I will let you know what grade you should expect to receive on them. And then another thing to know, right, is you're welcome to contact me with questions. Maybe you missed the class or there's an idea you'd like to explore in more detail. But once the midterm window begins on Wednesday, I will essentially be in a communication blackout about any content that might be on the exam, right? So I can't answer those questions for you once the midterm window begins. If you have other kind of logistical or other questions that you have, I'll answer those, but I won't be able to answer questions about content in the course once that midterm review or midterm window opens. So just bear that in mind. Any questions on any of that? Again, I know that I've gone over this before, but I just like to be as clear as possible so you know what to expect. Okay, so we spent some time last class going over face negotiation theory. It's also something that is discussed in this week's Canvas prompt. So Canvas prompt number 4 is due by the end of the day today. So if you're choosing this as one of your 6 Canvas prompts to do, just keep that deadline in mind. We went over FACE negotiation theory in a bit of detail, but I wanted to take some time to break it down in a little bit more detail. So I have a section of an interview from Dr. Stella King-Toomey, who developed FACE negotiation theory, that I wanted to share and then have us spend some time discussing in a little bit more detail.
State University, author of FACE negotiation theory. Stella, what is FACE?
FACE is about communication with technology. It's a concept of social work that we have in human wants and needs. So it's actually about communication identity, respect issue, and other consideration issues.
Is it a private thing, a public thing?
I think it's both. Depending on what culture we're talking about, I'm feeling that for the collectivistic, group-oriented type of culture like Japan, China, there's a difference between the public self-representation phase and the private self. Whereas in individualistic culture, such as the larger US culture or the larger Australian culture, there might be a closer correspondence between the public self and the private self.
Flesh out the differences between those two types of culture.
Basically, individualistic culture emphasizes the importance of I identity more so than the we identity. And we emphasize on taking personal initiative, we emphasize on personal achievement. Whereas collectivistic culture kind of emphasize teamwork, group orientation, group harmony issues, that we should always be considerate of other people's space.
His jacket and tie have not aged the best, but I think the argument still holds. So FACE negotiation theory, right, as Dr. King-Toomey lays out, deals with how cultures are negotiating their reputation and how they come across to other groups of people. And I think she lays out how a lot of the spectrums and differences might impact the ways in which we manage and negotiate things, right? So this idea of FACE, right, the persona or perception that you want other people to have of you, the public presenting self, that's something that you do regardless of culture. So what is seen as a good reputation or good body image, right? Those are things that can change depending on the culture and situation. Again, different cultures have different conceptions of beauty, right? But also FACE is about how somebody might be seen as a good person or contributor to the group and that group's goals. So people of all cultures try to negotiate FACE. That's an important element regardless of culture, this idea of reputation. But FACE and FACE work, right? Work being the way that we manage reputations with other people is especially important in an emotionally charged situation. If you get into a heated argument with your parent, right, and you start yelling at them and you're really frustrated with them, right, those are the moments in which navigating and dealing with FACE become really important because you've damaged your reputation and relationship with your parent and you're working together to try to improve your relationship going forward, right? So those are the situations where it can be a really big deal. Again, a lot of political leaders, right, will do nonverbal communication, like they'll tap somebody on the shoulder, or they'll try to shake a hand, right, or they'll use a sign. For instance, the 2-finger victory sign, right, is considered obscene in Australia. So sometimes people will create emotionally charged situations due to a lack of understanding of other cultures. We also talked in last class about individualism versus collectivism. Individualistic cultures are focused on achievement. Collectivist cultures are focused on the benefits and harmony of the group. There's also this idea of power distance, right? So in cultures that have small power distance, generally speaking, you are able to more openly communicate with people that might occupy higher social status or authority than you. So maybe you and your boss can more openly talk about you being frustrated with getting really bad shifts and working really bad hours. In large power distance, generally speaking, there's a lot more hierarchy and there's an expectation that you might listen and not directly confront people that have higher authority than you, right? So smaller power distance probably means that you're more likely to say, hey, grandma, you're being racist, right? So power distance would be our openness to talk to somebody about behavior that they're doing that we want to critique. We also have this idea of individualism and collectivism shaping how we orient our face work, right? So as Dr. Toomey brought up, in more individualistic cultures, we're more concerned with preserving and maintaining our own face. A really good example of this is how you manage something like your presence on social media. What profile photos are you using? Are you updating your LinkedIn, right? Oftentimes, those elements are face work that's designed to manage your own reputation and how you're coming across. Other-oriented face work in more collectivist cultures means that you're taking efforts to preserve the group. Oftentimes, right, we can feel secondhand anxiety or embarrassment. We empathize with the feelings that people have, and there's something that resonates with us. We have a good friend who's giving a presentation for a class, but they're kind of struggling a little bit, right? We feel for them and we're worried for them. And we might negotiate face work by saying, hey, you did a great job. We really enjoyed hearing you, and really trying to shore up that support when there was an event that happened that required that level of maintenance. Power distance shapes face work strategy. You're more likely to grin and bear it, right, in higher power distance, and more likely to use more confrontational approaches in lower power distance. Cultural variability, again, those measures that we looked at, and differences between cultures can shape the strategies that they use to manage reputation. There's also this idea of intercultural face work competence, which connects back to what we've been talking about with cultural intelligence. This idea that we integrate what we understand and know about different cultures in ways that helps us to navigate some of the challenges and issues that we might have, and conflicts of maintaining good face work. For instance, if you ate dinner first and it was considered disrespectful in a culture for you to do that, maybe that means that rather than profusely apologizing and drawing attention to yourself, maybe you just change that behavior in the future. Oftentimes, again, world leaders who commit faux pas and disrespectful behavior to members of different cultures might issue something like a formal apology. So this is an example of face work competence, of understanding and being attentive to how the impacts of what somebody does in our interpersonal exchanges can affect people in other cultures. Any questions on any of that? Again, face negotiation theory is discussed in this Canvas prompt. It's also a theory, if you're asked about incorporating a theory from the course, right, that you could choose to use. Last class, we also talked about these spectrums of culture, which come from Stuart Hall, who's here on the right, who developed cultural studies to try to understand and compare different ways that cultures behave. I know we spent some time on them. Are there any of these spectrums that you'd like us to go over again, or any spectrums that you'd like to see an example of? Again, these spectrums are useful to understand that members of a culture communicate differently on the basis of their attitudes and beliefs in these different areas. Okay. So what I want to do next is have us work together on a reading that I linked on the front page of Canvas. So if you go to the front page of Canvas, you'll notice right here at the top, it says Nassim article. So if you have a device, you're welcome to access it through there. However, I've also printed several copies of this reading for folks to read and work through by hand. So it's up to you as to which of those two you would prefer. And what I want you to do is just to take some time to work through this reading. It's 2 pages, and as you're reading, to take notes and highlight. You can also highlight in this if you want to. You're welcome to keep it. Some of the ways in which you see this culture communicated. So you can pull it up online or work through that on paper. Raise your hand if you would like a paper copy. Keep your hand up until I get to you. Anybody else need one? Okay. So take some time on your own to read through this. So when you've finished reading through the article, I'd like you to find a partnership or group of three and take some time to address these questions. How does this culture communicate, considering some of those elements of culture that we talked about in class? What spectrums might be used to define this culture? So thinking about things like individualism versus collectivism, power distance, and so on. Lastly, how does this culture negotiate pace? So take about 10 minutes to chat and have one person write or type for 10 minutes your responses on these questions.
So. Magical versions, charms.
So take about 5 more minutes. I transition into chatting in a group if you haven't done so already.
I just got done reading.
Okay.
Can I just write down really quick?
Yeah, or you want to share as well. Chat a little bit.
I got a little early. Now it seems like it's communicated through the vaccine is all these. Yeah, it seems like they don't like communicate with each other. That's what they do. It seems like the Normans, they believe, and that even when they don't think the medicine is fault. It almost seems like brain. It's like the medicine that they communicate with each other. Like a different way, right? Yeah. Nice. Culture. I'd say it's definitely like our versus local people in medicine has a very high power. Yeah. All right. There would be a high power. Common man. And then
Take about 2 more minutes.
Avoidance. Yeah. I think so, like, Speculative. We just have. Yeah. It was like even like the yeah. Well, it was the children said it was like the place you go to die, but the parents are willing to go. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and wrap up your discussion. All right, so let's talk about this reading together and take some time to chat about some elements of this culture and how this culture communicates. So let's start with this first question. How does this culture communicate? How about let's hear from the trio in the back. What were some of the things you noticed about how this culture communicates?
What we wrote down was one of the ways the medicine men communicate by ingredients, like secret language.
Yeah, so that's one of the ways, right? Using kind of language, developing this vocabulary for ingredients. How about this partnership up down here? What were some things you noticed about communication? Oh, okay, so all four of you, yeah. Uh-huh.
The use of rituals and shrines in their homes.
Right. So in this way, this culture is using artifacts, right? Gifts and the exchange of gifts that have meanings. So these physical objects, of course, are carrying a lot of significance to this group and to the way that this group communicates. Any other things that folks noticed about how this culture communicates?
They believe that the human body is like hideous.
Yeah, so the kind of body image portraying the human body as hideous or gross, and the need of the kind of modifications and procedures and actions to deal with that, right? So these are a lot of elements of communication, also the use of physicality in space, such as, right, the use of temples, the rooms, including charm box, right? The usage of a lot of these objects is framing a lot of elements of cultural communication. So let's talk a little bit about spectrums. How many people focus on context, high versus low? About power distance? A little bit, yeah. And then, you know, there's a few measures that we can think back through here, right? So in addition to those, what about masculinity and femininity? Yeah. So what were some things that were noticed here about that and the way that that was at play in this culture? Yeah, go for it.
There's a large power divide between the high class and the low class. Their ability to give gifts and have better shrines.
Any other spectrums that people noticed here or talked about? Yeah.
We did indulgence versus
Yeah, this culture is pretty hard on the restraint side, right? Taking action to regulate behavior and bodies, right? Yeah. You know, some other things that we might be thinking about here, in addition to those definitions, there's a lot of context or a lot of discussion about long and short-term orientation, right? The usage of time, especially in talking about these temples, where in some cases people go to die, right? And then let's talk about face. So understanding some of the ways that these cultures negotiated or dealt with it. So let's hear again from that group of four. What were some of the things you noticed about face?
They kind of kept up with themselves by visiting the Holy Mountain as we listen.
Right. So a lot of these relationships and groups are a way in which managing reputation can be established. Any other points here about how face was used in this culture? So one way to think about this is in the context of usage of space and the usage of shrines, right? So there's a mention here about how with the shrines, right, people who have higher economic status and are able to have more in the shrines, right, have fancier versions, but some people are using kind of makeshift shelving and other things in their shrines, right? So that might be an element of negotiating faith as well. And we can also just think about the usage of rituals and practices here, right? How people do things, again, like regulating behavior through their involvement in some of these groups. Raise your hand if you have an idea as to what this culture is. Okay, so a few of you. So if you're not sure what this culture is, that's okay. I'll give you a hint. Take the name and flip the letters backwards. So if you didn't know this or didn't catch on to this, that's completely okay. In fact, the whole point of this article is that you're not supposed to be able to or have a harder time doing that. So yes, Nasarima is backwards for American, and this entire reading is a description and discussion about American culture. Here are some examples. The discussion of holy mouth men, those are dentists, right? They talk about injecting and putting objects in. That'd be like your Novocaine shot to help you numb when you're going to the dentist. There are these charms, the charm box. Think about that as like a jewelry box or a shelf in your bathroom, right? The shrines are referring to homes. There's a discussion about the use of bathroom space. These temples, right? The temple could be a hospital, right? At times, the temple is where people go to die. The listener would be somebody like a therapist or counselor that you speak to about a range of issues in a similar manner to disposing of people's spirits. So a lot of discussion about things such as dental care, of homes, but right, the usage of language here was a way to reframe and to think about this differently. So this article, The Body Ritual of the Nasarima, comes from a cultural scholar called Horace Minor. And the Nasarima article was written several days ago, or several decades ago, as a way of responding to how we think about and understand culture. If we think about the history of a lot of cultural studies, anthropology, communication, there was a tendency when studying other cultures, especially when studying indigenous cultures, cultures of a lot of underrepresented groups, to portray members of these cultures as savages, right? To treat them as if the practices and behavior that members of these cultures did were strange, were bizarre, didn't make sense, right? And so oftentimes this type of language would be used to describe these different groups. And that's ethnocentrism, right? It's this idea that we portray and treat other cultures as if their behaviors are odd or bizarre, don't make sense, and in a very judgmental way. So people started to take notice of that trend, right? And Horace Minor said, what if we take that same language, right? The same way that we portray other cultures as strange and unusual, and we flip it around and describe broader American culture under that lens. And in so doing, right, helping us to think about how we use language to define and explain culture, how ethnocentrism impacts the way that we perceive and think about other cultures, and what ways we might start to reflect on and think about how our own culture might be thought about to other people. Because if you're reading this and thinking about like the mouthmen, the idea that people hate their bodies, right, that sounds odd to us. But imagine how it feels as a member of another culture who's looking at what we do, right? And might have, in a similar way, a lot of notes about how we behave and act that members of that culture find unusual. So I wanted to do this article as a way of us thinking about and responding to the ways that we think about ethnocentrism and to help us in pushing back against that. Wanted to share just a short clip that does this too.
This week on Journey Online Culture, the Nasarima. Between the Grand River and the 49th parallel lives a curious union of people. Collectively, they are known as the Nest Arena. This week, we will see the Nest Arena in two residential settings, the urban, highly populated area and the rural, less populated region. Also, we will observe Nest Arena cultural practices such as food acquisition, consumption, recreation, dwelling up. While the Nest Arena control a vast amount of land, most of its peoples live in densely populated areas. These urban centers are laid out with mathematical precision to maximize their use of space.
So the video goes on, right? But it's another example of this broader project that's aiming to reframe how we think about American culture. So think about this article as a way that we might push back against ethnocentrism, and also a way that we might use language and communication to define and think about cultures and cultural difference. So to wrap up for today, talk about language and the ways that it helps us to understand the experiences of cultures. Talk about face work and how face negotiation theory helps us to explore cultural difference. The idea through this article that behaviors that are familiar to us and make sense to us can be seen as off, strange, and unusual to other groups. So please pass forward or email me your attendance work for today. Again, next Monday's class is midterm review, so come in with your questions. Have a great weekend. Have fun in this weather, and I'll see you next week.
Question on inspection and defined culture.
Yes.
You talked about